Good evening and welcome to Wrestling Rewind. I am your host, Angel Amoroso, and I am joined by my co-host,
Iron Man Tommy Cairo. What's up, Angel? How are you?
What's up, Tommy?
I'm lost in this book, the Calgary book.
Yes, very interesting stuff. So last week we were doing a book reading of Stampede Wrestling, the Calgary, and some stuff about the Hart family. And that was part one. So we're going to get right into part two and pick up where we left off because these stories are wild. So, Tommy, pick up where we left off.
Okay, we're going to be on a road in some godforsaken town in Canada in the ice with a crappy van.
Now, who are we talking about here?
We left off with a situation revolving around shows that Bruce Hart had booked, and they're talking about, what's going on the road, driving on, in a van that was barely mechanically sound, hours and hours on the road, torture, ribs, just not a pretty picture. But I believe there were probably a couple guys along the way that actually enjoyed this, because this is the true way. If you graduated from the Hart Foundation or a Hart Dungeon or had anything to do with anyone who was still training in that fashion, even if Stu Hart was gone, you were blessed and you made money in the business. Yeah. I don't think there was anybody that graduated that didn't go on to make money, and they're still making money. By the way, have you seen Natty lately? Neidhart?
No.
Wow, she looks fantastic. I don't know what, maybe work, whatever, but God bless her. I mean, she's got to be up there now.
If she could still work, God bless her. Keep them around every day until the end.
And where is she from?
They're happy with it. Jim Neidhart, one of our good
family. Yeah. What a shame he's not around, huh?
Yeah. No.
Anyway, all right. So
on the story about the excessive body odor and belching and farting and torture and beatings in Calgary wrestling. So let's get back to these interesting stories in part two.
And real quick, what I want to say about this area is it was not unlike Hawaii or not unlike Los Angeles, places where guys came and went because they were in between territories and they were utilized while they were there. So it was an influx and a hybrid wrestling at its beginning. The melding of all these different styles that these Hearts were hiring these people from all over. Now you got the Dynamite Kid coming. So, innovation, pioneers of this business. So anyway, here we go. The farther north the caravan traveled, the more uninviting the roads. These big semis would come up from behind, and you'd have to pull over and let them by. Then you'd wait for all the dust to settle down. Johnson remembers. You'd be traveling along, and all of a sudden, that's the end of the road. There's a lake there. You'd have to wait a half hour for the barge to come along and take you across. Then you'd travel another 50 kilometers to hit another lake, and you'd wait for the next barge. Bruce Hart remembers obscenely fat bumblebees and the kamikaze horseflies splattered on the windshield, and the deer, antelope, and porcupines that sauntered onto the road. There were buffaloes up there that looked like they were on steroids, he says. They roam around the highway, not yielding to anyone. They stroll across the road and give you this look like, fuck you. I'll let you go when I feel like it. This is brutal. This is brutal.
Canada's so cute.
Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith had only recently returned to the Stampede Wrestling circuit after a phenomenal 4-year run in the World Wrestling Federation. Its WrestleMania was considered the Super Bowl of the wrestling world, and the Bulldogs had appeared on three of the cards in one in which they won the WWF World Tag Titles. The heavy metal star Ozzy Osbourne stood in their corner. For that single match, the British Bulldogs were paid $20,000 each. They had children's toys made of their likenesses. They were on posters, collector's cards, and all manner of merchandise. They made more money than they ever thought they'd see in their lives. Enough that Dynamite was able to pay cash for a $220,000 18-acre ranch outside of Calgary for him and his wife. And as they had become stars of network television, the Bulldogs appeared in public service announcements, preaching hypocritically to the kiddies about virtues of clean living. That sounds familiar. He even made a guest appearance on the hit TV action series, The A-Team. There were but a few of the perks. These were but a few of the perks to be had when you were two of the top stars in the WWF. That organization, run by Vince McMahon Jr., had changed the face of professional wrestling. For decades, the North American wrestling scene had been divided into multiple territories, such as Stu Hart's Western Canadian promotion. Each promoter had his own slice of land, his own kingdom, as it were, and he controlled the wrestling cards in that territory. While they did swap talent and occasionally do co-promotions, it was rare that promoters crossed into each other's territory. Where that did happen, it usually provoked a territorial war, and the aggressor would find himself blacklisted in the industry. But McMahon didn't follow the rules. Instead, he finagled a national presence for himself on network TV, and in the world of pay-per-view, he defied the territorial boundaries, booking shows in every territory across the country, poaching each organization's top talents while he was at it. McMahon orchestrated high-profile tie-ins with the rock world via Cyndi Lauper and MTV. He boasted superhero-like Hulk Hogan as his top champion, and megastar crossed over to the mainstream when he appeared in Rocky III with Sylvester Stallone. McMahon epitomized the flash over substance. It was a decade in which a Hollywood star became president of the United States. The marketing images in a rock video became more important than the music, and blockbuster movies reigned supreme. It was a decade punctuated by unparalleled corporate greed, a time tailor-made for the figure like McMahon, and he prospered, turning his father's Connecticut and New York-based territory into a global multimedia empire that brought professional wrestling to the masses in a way that Stu Hart never dreamed possible. The WWF was impossible to compete with. Old wrestling territories seemed like small potatoes next to its big-budget cartoon Flash. As their fans abandoned them, territories toppled one after another. Despite its superb talent roster and loyal fan base, Stampede Wrestling had also fallen on hard times financially. Stu Hart was considering selling the business in 1984 when Vince McMahon came along, looking to break into the Western Canadian market rather than fighting what was probably a losing battle with its grassroots production values and single camera TV tapings. How could Stampede hope to compete? Stu told McMahon the promoting rights to his territory sold. The deal called for Stu to be paid $100,000 a year for 10 years, plus 10% of the gate from all house shows in Calgary and Edmonton. That's good until Vince decides not to promote there anymore.
Right.
Stu, in turn, would give McMahon his TV spots across Western Canada. Another stipulation was that McMahon would hire top talents of Stampede Wrestling, including Stu's son, Bret Hart, his son-in-law, Jim Neidhart, and Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid. Cousins Dynamite and Davey had been Stampede Wrestling icons during the early 1980s. Dynamite, who came from the poor English coal mining town of Wigan, had been wrestling since he was a teenager. It was Bruce Hart who brought him to Calgary in 1978 when he was only 19 years old. At first, Stu was reluctant, believing the kid, who then stood 5'8" and weighed no more than 170 pounds, to be a runt. Surely he'd be squashed by the hulks of the wrestling game. Supposedly, his exact words were something like, skinny bastard, So he wasn't too impressed, but he became impressed. All right, so Dynamite soon turned the promotion, which was doing lukewarm business in the late 70s, on its head. Nobody had seen moves like this, and the fans were excited again. This little runt was a draw, bringing folks back into the arenas by the hundreds. A fearless acrobat, he launched himself across the ring when hit, making his opponents look like Superman. When he was bounced off the ropes or given a simple hip toss, he flew like a crash test dummy shot from a cannon. On the offensive, he sprang at his foes like a panther. Now, you got to understand, he was doing stuff that we don't even know how he was doing it. Then he was, what he did with Tiger Mask in Japan. So this was truly the beginning of what would come to be utilized many of his moves and many of the things that he did. I think the wrestling business is where it is on that in that aspect because of him. I really do. And that territory was not
wrestle more like a Japanese wrestler.
Yeah.
When you look at it, his technique and the things that he did, he was the first, in our area to wrestle like the Japanese. And
when you did that, and you did it here now in Canada, and now there's another, so you're already adding to the hybrid that would, just like MMA, different guys come from different areas, but now we've had enough, it's been around long enough that the best guys did it all from the beginning. But this is what this promotion was like. And it wasn't a big man. There were big men, but there were they had a couple different divisions lighter. So it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that he could be looked at as a threat if they put him with the lighter guys, because he was so much different than anybody else.
Right.
Dynamite was genuinely tough, too. Even though the outcomes of bouts were generally predetermined and the punches pulled, it was uncommon for the boys to get rough with each other. Despite his size, Dynamite quickly made it clear that he could hold his own. He was fast, strong, and prone to sharp, violent outbursts. Mm-hmm. He had a complex about his size. And in security, he carried like a demon on his shoulder. And when he felt slighted in any way, when the trigger was pulled on his temper, Dynamite was someone to be feared. He loved being feared. Being a hard man, as the Brits call it, was everything to Dynamite. Win, lose, or draw, he used to boast. He never backed down from anybody. Once he discovered steroids, eventually bulking up to almost 230 pounds, he became more volatile and dangerous than ever. Davey Boy Smith from Manchester arrived in Calgary in 1981. 4 years younger than Dynamite. He worshipped his cousin and tried to emulate him in every way. Although he lacked Dynamite's mean streak, fearlessness, and talent for innovation, Smith was an exceptionally gifted athlete, and his star power was obvious. Pin-up handsome, with a warm look in his eyes, Davey Boy became a favorite with the female fans. They cried when bad guys beat on him. He could fly almost as high as Dynamite, too. And once he got on steroids, or the juice, as the boys called it, he developed a massive build that Dynamite, to his chagrin, could never match.
Very beefy. Very beefy.
Yeah, the only problem with that statement is he did match it because he was much, pound for pound, had more muscle. You said it. He was very beefy.
Yes.
But as musculature, Dynamite Kid was hard as a rock, and you could see everything.
Yeah, the abs, like unbelievable abs, you know.
Yep. And he didn't even have
with him.
Yep. Just phenomenal. While Dynamite and Davey had been cast as bitter foes throughout most of their Stampede run, McMahon recreated them as a team, the British Bulldogs, and their hard, fast, acrobatic style left spectators awestruck. But the dream soon crumbled. First, Dynamite's high-impact style caught up with him, and he ruptured 2 discs in his back. The Bulldogs were forced to drop their titles. It was the beginning of a steady physical decline that would eventually end Dynamite's revolutionary career. To make matters worse, the Bulldogs were living at a punishing pace, wrestling well over 300 nights a year, never taking off time to let their injuries heal. On the road, they partied like decadent rock stars. Nightly booze binges, some of the wrestlers smoking crack cocaine after the matches, along with his regular intake of steroids, up to 1,200 milligrams of testosterone injected into his buttocks daily. Dynamite was becoming increasingly reliant on a number of addictive substances. Sounds like this was no different than Calgary.
Right. I'm sure you've heard the story about how in Japan they waited till he passed out and hung him upside down by his feet and were throwing the steroid needles at his butt cheeks.
No,
like he was a dartboard. Yeah, wow. that was a classic story back in the day. Actually.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Now, would that have been the Americans or the Japanese guys?
No, the American guys went with him down there and did that. So I
was going to say it better not have been a Japanese guy.
No.
I'll have to go back there and kick some asses.
Yeah, right.
Let's see.
Wild stories.
Yeah. Dynamite was becoming increasingly reliant on a number of addictive substances. Of his WWF years, he writes, "A normal working day for me was speed to wake me up in the morning to catch an early flight, Valium to make me sleep on the plane, Percocet just before the match. Then we wrestle, hit the beer and the cocaine until the early hours before taking another Valium to put me to sleep at night. That makes me want to cringe.
Yes, it sounds about right, though, right?
What a roller coaster, right?
Hey, back in the day, you do what you have to
Yeah.
get through the day and the night.
And never uh, judge a man till you walk a mile in his shoes. And there aren't too many people that ever lived that have walked in his shoes. So
Exactly.
the Bulldogs became notorious in WWF dressing room for their malicious pranks. Dynamite had long been fond of slipping X-Lac into the wrestlers' cloak, even causing them to have embarrassing accidents, often causing them to have embarrassing accidents just about the time they hit the ring. Wayne Farris, who wrestled in both Stampede Wrestling and the WWF as a sleazy Elvis wannabe, named the Honky Tonk Man, says the Bulldogs once slipped a sleeping pill into wrestler Outback Jack's drink. They then shaved off all his hair, including his eyebrows, stripped him naked, and stuck him in an elevator, sending him down to the hotel lobby.
I can't.
And the worst thing you could do was be mad. Because once they knew they could get to you, they wouldn't stop.
Of course, yeah, easy target.
I seen him terrorize people, Honky Tonk says, of his experiences with Dynamite in the WWF dressing room. One day, a French-Canadian wrestler named Jacques Rougeau Jr. blamed Dynamite when he found his clothing in tatters after a match. Dynamite swore he was innocent and attacked Rougeau later that evening, sucker punching him while he was playing cards in the dressing room. Weeks later, in a retaliation, Jacques and his brother Raymond blindsided Dynamite, who claims Jacques was wearing a pair of brass knuckles. Dynamite lost 4 teeth and his mouth was torn to shreds. He got exactly what he deserved, says Honky Tonk. Although McMahon tried to patch things up, Dynamite was always on bad terms with the WWF after that incident, and it wasn't long before the Bulldogs left the organization. Which, to me, that Honky Tonk, I know Wayne, he's like a prima donna kind of guy. And you know what? I don't think that makes you a tough guy that you snuck around the corner and hit him with a pair of brass knucks. I mean, I don't think that makes you any better than him being a bully. You know what I mean? So why not face him, man to man, or beg for him to leave you alone like a little girl?
Yeah, a rib's a rib. Like, take it and move on.
And certainly getting upset is not the thing to do. Okay. Meanwhile, back in Calgary, the Hearts were running Stampede Wrestling again, reviving the promotion in 1985. Surprisingly, the WWF juggernaut had encountered a backlash in Alberta. The group's early live events in the province proved to be a financial disappointment. Fans had turned away in droves, at least in part out of loyalty to the local wrestling they missed so much. McMahon, who wasn't making money in the territory, wanted out of his agreement with Stu, saying it wasn't feasible for him. So they couldn't get WWF product over after they saw what they've been saying. You know what I mean?
Right. Of course not.
Fans had turned away in droves. McMahon, who wasn't making money in the territory, wanted out of his agreement with Stu, saying it wasn't feasible for him. He told Stu he was free to start up Stampede Wrestling again. Of course, the checks would stop. So Stu agreed to the new deal, and Stampede Wrestling was back in business. After the Bulldogs left the WWF, it was natural that they returned to Stampede Wrestling. But Dynamite was no longer the same man who had once set the promotion ablaze. He couldn't get over his loss to Rougeau. He couldn't accept that another man had beaten him down, that he might be lesser in the eyes of the boys. His reputation as the hardest man in the ring had become compromised. Somebody had stood up against his tyranny and won. It preyed on Dynamite, eating him away as his pride like acid, driving him nearly insane with bitterness. That's horrible. I think he should have done something like, go get him again. He suffered. He didn't have to, just carrying the weight of that. And I kind of can I can understand that, and I can relate to that. Not being who I once was, and thinking that everybody expects you to still be, and trying to constantly live up to that. Eventually, it wears you down, and Father Time will do that. So if you don't do it gracefully, it takes even more toll on you than it should.
Right.
So that's a shame. I'm really sorry he had to suffer like that. In his wheelchair alone in some crappy apartment, smoking cigarettes. Terrible.
Just horrible.
Really sad. Um, After the incident with Rougeau, I think Tommy felt the need to reclaim his invincibility. Said Ross Hart, another son of Stu, who worked behind the scenes training and doing TV production. Suddenly, he didn't feel like the toughest guy on the block anymore. Ego bruised and drug crazed, Dynamite returned to Stampede Wrestling in the early part of 1989 on the condition that he become head booker for the territory. Working with the promoter, the booker formulates the show's storylines and determines the outcome of the matches. Who will get the big push and win the title belt? Who will wrestle babyface and who will wrestle heel? The booker calls all these shots, and Dynamite wanted the gig. Bruce Hart had been the main booker since Stampede reopened in the fall of 1985, but Stu sensed it was time for a change. At his best, Bruce was a fantastic idea man, years ahead of his time. Corrupt referees, rebellious heroes who were borderline villains. So he was doing the babyface heel babyface back then. Creepy monster heels who were in league with the forces of the occult. These concepts would all make the WWF millions of dollars in the years to come, and Bruce was beating them to the punch on it. Fans loved the twisted angles Bruce dreamed up, but Stu disagreed with the way his son managed the business. The wrestlers found Bruce manipulative and backstabbing. They didn't like the way he played dressing room politics. Bruce had his favorites, the wrestlers claimed, and he held grudges too. You'd be his chosen star one day, destined for the main event matches, but if you didn't suck up to him, or if you fell on his bad side, your character would flounder. Of course, this is a common complaint against bookers in the wrestling world. The booker is the man calling the shots, and it's a rare booker who makes everyone in the dressing room happy. Sure.
Sounds familiar.
If you are the booker and you're working, that's more of a problem than if you're a booker and you're not working.
Right.
Stu often shared his reservations with Bruce. Always had 5 or 6 heels in the corner of the ring, and they all had weapons, and Bruce would go into that corner and beat the hell out of this guy. Stu didn't think it was believable. Coming from Bruce, Stu was passionate that the action inside the ring looked real. Fans had to buy into every move. However, it's not uncommon for bookers who also wrestle to cast themselves as stars. And it's hard to deny that the fans loved Bruce. Even though his ring skills didn't come close to those Dynamite Kid. Horrible. He was horrible. I had to work in a tag team, in New York. Horrible.
Yes, yeah.
It says Dynamite Kid, he couldn't come close to Dynamite Kid. He was a solid performer who knew how to work a crowd. That didn't matter to the wrestlers, who griped that the only reason he had got where he was in the game was because he was the boss's brat. So Stu relieved Bruce of his booking duties, and when Dynamite, swinging his star clout, demanded the job, he got it. I don't know. According to Ross Hart, Dynamite's booking was disastrous. He was awful, Ross says. He was a great wrestler, a great performer, but his booking concepts were terrible. It was just a lot of gimmicks. Let's have a cage match. Let's have a street match. We were just talking about that. And it was quite often built around ill-conceived storylines. Storylines need to be developed over a period of time. And with Tommy, he was just hotshot, trying to do these things instantaneously. You might attract fans for a while, but then there's nothing to follow it with, and a lot of matches were poorly received. In April, Dynamite took a month off to wrestle in Japan. When he returned, found that Stu had handed the reins back to Bruce. Dynamite wasn't the performer he had been at that point, Ross says. He wasn't making the effort anymore, and he was pretty battered up with all his injuries. He was never the same after his back injury. I think he was having trouble coming to terms with the reality that his career was spiraling downward. Then he got the slap in the face being replaced as a booker, the commander by Bruce. I don't think Tommy could accept that. He basically plotted and established the first mutiny he could. How are we on time so I know where to...
A few minutes.
Okay.
We're good.
Bruce Hart was taking his turn driving on the Yellowknife track. The Japanese wrestler who went by the name of Sumu Hara was riding shotgun, while Dynamite, Davey Boy, and the other wrestlers partied in the back. Me and this Japanese guy were the only guys in the band who were not completely plastered, Bruce says. Everyone else was drunk or stoned. Dynamite came up and kept trying to offer me a beer. I don't mind having a beer, but not while I'm driving. So I said, no, it's okay. But he started getting insistent, which was immediately a tip-off to me. They were getting almost belligerent and obnoxious about it. So finally, for a peaceful coexistence, I said, okay. I faked drinking it a bit and then passed it to the Japanese guy. As Bruce had suspected, the beer was spiked. That was clear. When the gang pulled over for gas in Fox Creek, about 2.5 hours northwest of Edmonton, and Sumuhara was so fucked up he literally couldn't crawl out of the van. So I'm sure they gave him a halcyon, an H-bomb.
Exactly.
Bruce turned to Dynamite and Davey and snapped, I'm driving, you imbeciles. If I had drunk that beer, what the hell do you think would have happened? This is a 2-lane stretch of highway. And they're in the van that he's driving, right? I'm sorry.
It's beyond the rib.
This is a 2-lane. Yep, this is a 2-lane stretch of highway. We could have hit a semi head on. They just gave me this fuck you type of look, Bruce says. About an hour later, the van blew its engine, forcing all 18 wrestlers to squeeze together in the second van, their travel cases perched on their knees as the summer heat rose to scorching temperatures. So too did the tension. The van began to feel like an oven. Bruce, having taken his turn at the wheel, climbed into Johnson's Thunderbird, hoping to lighten the load in the van. On the bright side, Bruce says, that night show in Yellowknife was stellar. The next evening, as Bruce remembers, the tour hit Hay River, a town of 3,500, couple of hours drive southwest of Yellowknife. Bruce had to arrive early for a radio interview he had scheduled to promote that night's match. Again, he caught a ride with Johnson. He invited several of the wrestlers to ride with him, but nobody wanted to get up earlier than they had to. Trouble began that evening. The show was supposed to kick off at 7:30, but none of the other wrestlers had arrived except the ring veteran Bulldog Bob Brown and his nephew Curry Brown, who had driven up on their own. Irate, Bruce started the show almost half an hour late, squaring off against the chunky 275-pound Curry Brown. Bruce and Curry fought for 45 minutes. I'll give him that much. Way too long for an opening match, Bruce says. Luckily, he was a virgin. This was a virgin crowd, and they were fairly tolerant. After stalling for a time, Bruce hit the ring again, this time with Bulldog Bob Brown. I came up with this bogus pretext where he said I cheated to beat Curry or some bullshit, Bruce says. When the others finally arrived, Bruce stormed into the dressing room. Bruce says he confronted Dynamite for being late, which Dynamite took exception to. Dynamite claims he encountered a cocky heart, grinning like a Cheshire cat, taking pleasure in how awful the road trip had been for those in the van. Drunken, Dynamite threw an iron fist, belting Bruce in the jaw. Bruce claims Davey Boy followed up the assault with a headbutt to the teeth. Pandemonium ensued as Bruce went down. The wrestlers gathering around like frenzied gorillas. They wanted blood. Oh my God.
That's wild.
You do not want to be in front of Dynamite. He don't care. Headbutt him, break his nose. Good for him.
Yeah, he seems to enjoy the pain.
Yeah. Dynamite stormed toward the ring to wrestle his match. On the way, he swung a punch at Johnson, who was acting as ring announcer, clocking him in front of the fans.
Oh, wow.
After the match, Dynamite returned to the dressing room for another stab at Bruce. That's when Bruce and Johnson dashed to the van and locked themselves inside. It's still not clear exactly why the wrestlers were so late arriving that evening. Dynamite claims that a rock hit the van's windshield, smashing it out, and that the van got another flat tire. Bruce doesn't buy it. He heard another story from some of the more innocent wrestlers on the trip. They were all drinking and fucking around in Yellowknife that night, and they didn't leave until at least 5 p.m., Bruce says. They had been chasing whatever woman were up there, and finally they set off all hammered. About 40 miles outside of town, Dynamite got this brilliant idea to give them an excuse for being late, and he kicked the windshield out of the van. So the big excuse was that the rock hit the windshield. The whole thing blew out up in their faces because now they're riding along and getting pelted by these bees and horseflies.
Great.
When the van blew its tire, the motley crew was out of luck. The boys had thrown out the spare to make room in the cab. Bruce thinks they may have hitchhiked into Hay River. I couldn't believe that adults would actually do things this stupid, Bruce says, of the whole sordid scene. Wow.
Wrestlers, adults, but wrestlers, so believe it because they do stupid shit like this.
And And what gets me is we go in a locker room, and I know without knowing 90% of the guys' histories, there's a few that I know that are still around, some that I trained, but these guys don't know. This is the stuff they should be reading to understand how blessed they are and lucky they are to be allowed to wrestle, having not had the proper background, proper training, proper dues paying trips like this. Maybe not this horrible, but certainly any trip where you're away from your family in less than desirable conditions, you have to really love what you're doing to enjoy it. Or get something positive out of it. Like I remember waking up after being knocked out in a hotel in Philadelphia, and you and Jason was two queen size beds in there, or two king size, and had one whole bed loaded with food from I'm talking food for like 40 people.
And it was sus eating.
Yeah, they're like, you want to eat? I'm like, yeah, and I guess we'll be eating tomorrow and the next day too.
Yeah. Good times though, right? It was beautiful. We spent so much at that place.
I remember taking some of that because it was winter. We were held up, I think, for a storm or whatever. So we took some of that and we put it out the window. And then there, I think might have been a microwave. We heated it or something. Yeah.
Yes, keeping it fresh. Yeah. But this is a great book, and I love this book. We'll have to get back to this on another episode and tell more stories about the Hart family and Davy Boy and Dynamite. All these great stories to tell from this book about Calgary and Stampede Wrestling.
And we live it as we're reading it. You can live it, right?
Yeah,
right there.
Absolutely. Passion and Pain is the
Passion and Pain. Stampede Wrestling.
If you
don't have it,
pick it up for yourself. Tell me, where did you get this one?
This is one of I keep doing this. This is not. I'll get it straight. Now I lost you. Hold on.
No, you're
all
on.
Right, so what? I started when my family became aware. I became aware of what's Scott Teal's Crowbar Press.
Okay.
I saw the myriad of books that didn't look like the stuff that you bought. The Hulk Hogan book and first few that came out, Mick Foley, right? All that glad handing and never talking bad about anybody, just, only enough to be safe. And I started reading, I don't know which was the first, but every holiday, Father's Day, Christmas, my family asked me ahead of time, what do you want? And I just keep writing down titles. I just got the Buddy Rogers book, which we started. Great. This I've had for a while. I read the whole thing, and then when I picked it up again the other day, just looked through it again, I said, you know what? This is one of the few books. I'm going to tell you, I got stacks of books, and I'm not going to badmouth anybody, but I will tell you, out of all the books I have, the ones that were even worth reading were the whole story of the NWA, how it became monopoly on wrestling, the Hard Way by Don Fargo, Dynamite, about the Dynamite Kid, this Pride and Passion, and there's one or two more, and of course all the stuff that is archival, that is factual, and has dates and times and profiles. But those are the books. There's only a few.
So many, though. You have so many. And there's so many for us to cover on future editions of our Wrestling Archives book readings. And we'll get back to this one. And also The Heels was a great episode. Yes. We did some reading from there. So we'll get to all these titles in the future. So make sure to join us every week. Sunday at 7 p.m. on the Monty and the Pharaohs YouTube.
We're taking it back.
Yeah, we're taking it all the way back into arena reports and book readings and just getting into some deep stories and details about all your favorite legends of professional wrestling. So join us every week at 7 p.m. over on Monty and Pharaohs. And for my co-host, the Iron Man Tommy Cairo, I am the Virgin Princess Angel saying, have a nice night and a nice life.
See you.
Good night.